Your Excellencies, honoured guests, very good afternoon. Welcome to another one of these events. I really enjoy taking a time out from helping companies build their networks to talking to a wider audience about how to build an audience. What I want to do, when the slides come up, take about 20 minutes, take you on a journey. I want to base it in infrastructure, but I want to take you through what are the drivers. I want to stop in the middle and just make some comments about how important it is to education. And then I'll show you some examples. We'll run through to the end. And then we have about 20 minutes, hopefully, where you ask me some questions. And I hope I will have said a few things that are controversial enough that you will have lots of questions for me. We are in the middle of a revolution, in fact. We are converting our traditional economies to increasingly digital economies. And this has been going on now, let's call it 10 years. Certainly for the last 5, it's been on everybody's agenda. And so now we see that all the major industries, the ones that can see this global scope, the ones that are tied into industry in a very tangible way, all have specific large-scale plans to develop their digital economy. So it's national broadband plans, it's connectivity, it's rollout, and so on. So that's the wave that we're riding. And ICT is in the middle of that. ICT has become the word that we use to describe all of the technologies and the techniques. It used to be telecoms, and then it used to be IT. Now it's ICT because, as you will see, it's the combination of both. The connectivity and the processing. Connectivity and processing together, that's what gives us all of these benefits. And it's being co-opted because it's going to give so many things. It's going to create jobs, economic growth, new industries. It's going to reduce carbon footprint. It's going to touch every industry, everything from agriculture through to heavy industry, through to education and government. So that's why it's so important. That's why we're here today. That's why it's central. So that digital economy needs infrastructure. So this is a slide that I always show because I want to make the point that it has to be fast. It has to be everywhere. It has to be affordable, and in the end, we're going to build it around these tangible, human-centric activities, such as education, which is what we're talking about here today. So you can argue about the targets. So, for example, Europe has said by 2020, everybody should have access to 30 megabits. A couple of weeks ago, they said, actually, by 2025, we want everyone in Europe to have access to 100 megabits. So it's a moving target. So one of my key messages today is you must recognize how fast we are moving, that these targets are constantly getting ahead of us, the technology and the opportunities, so we have to think big. We've got about a big problem. We've got about 1 billion people we need to connect. It's a lot of work to do. Africa's a very big place. There's a lot of fiber optics, and it will be fiber optics that we're going to base it on here. The whole of the internet is one big fiber network. If you have not thought about this, everything about the undersea cables, all of the major trunk lines are all fiber optics. It will be fiber all the way to probably a couple of miles away from your house, and then it will either become fiber or wireless or maybe copper. So when I talk about the networks, I'm really talking about how far can we take these fiber networks close to you to your home, to your school, and to your business. And so the plans are changing. This is the problem we have ourselves. Good news is, as technologists, and Huawei is primarily a technology company, is that, in a sense, the technology is solved. We know how to do gigabit to anywhere that we want to take it. Now, I'm going to focus a lot on fiber to the home, GPON, because in the African context, that makes a lot of sense. You lack infrastructure. You might as well deploy something that's the best for you. But we can do other things as well. Coax, wireless technology, particularly 4G, 4.5G, it's going to be brilliant. We can already give you basically a gigabit over the LTE cellular network right now. And if you throw in a little bit of satellite for the guys that are really just too far beyond reach, we can reach everybody with decent internet. So it's a solvable problem from a technology point of view. What I want to talk about today is how to get there. I appreciate there's difficulties. Just talking about gigabit, if you want, there's a new site that's come up called Gigabit Monitor that tracks networks that are being deployed that offer gigabit or greater services. So I say that if you have a A single person, a home, you should be planning to how to get to a gigabit. If you have a school or a factory, hospital, you should be planning to how to get to 10 gigabits or more. That should be in your roadmap. How do I get there? When you're talking to people like technology, give me the roadmap to get me there. And this is the people that are deploying things. So what's interesting is the pace of change. So 70% of the gigabit networks that have been announced that are by this site are all in the last year or so. And what's interesting is most of those are GPON. And the other interesting fact is that we talk about 4G, you've probably heard about 5G, it's coming along in the next few years. There's already a bunch of operators have said, and we'll definitely do 5G. One of the goals of 5G is to reach so-called 10 gigabits over wireless to a single device. This is the ambition that I hope that you will embrace. It's got to be fast. This is what's going to deliver us the benefits in the future. And I'm not reaching. I believe now is the right time to accept this kind of thing. Who's doing it? It's obviously North American based. So for this year, a lot of North America, Asia, that's going to change. We see over the next few years that will be increasingly moving out to Australia and Europe. Africa, where's Africa on that map? We need to start filling in some numbers on Africa. That's the challenge for the technology policymakers in this room. How do we start filling in some of the gaps for Africa? So Huawei has a global connectivity index. It's a measurement of what's going on in the world of ICT. We publish it every year. It came out a couple of months ago. And it's our way of measuring digital transformation. How do we track? What things do we measure to say it's changing and at what rate? So we have this GCI, and that's going to measure how fast we're going to reach this digital economy. And what we've identified are 5 technology enablers. And I'm going to be basing everything I say on these 5, because they are fundamental to the technology and the enablers that I want to talk about today. These 5. Broadband at the very bottom, connectivity at a high speed level. Always on. Data centers, there's a mixture between data centers and cloud. You might think, is that the same thing? No. A data center is really just a building that's concentrated a bunch of computers into it. So it's done for cost benefit. It's cheaper to put them all in one building. When I talk about cloud, what I'm meaning is applications that distribute over potentially many data centers. It sees a cloud, not a center. So if you think about all of the major companies that you interact with, the Googles, the Facebooks, they're all clouds. They're not a single data center. That you see an application that's spread across. So there's a distinction and a distinct leap in maturity between data centers and cloud. Big data, I would tend to call big analytics. It makes much more sense to call it big analytics. It means taking a bunch of data and producing some intelligence out of it. And this is increasingly important. So Facebook, Google, if you follow the news, they're talking about buying AI companies. They have AI bots, this idea of artificial intelligence, Siri, Cortana, all these other technologies are all employing smarts at the back end to produce human-relevant intelligence at the front end. All that stuff's going on in the cloud. Internet of Things, a gentleman from Intel talked about it. It's going to be huge. It really will connect everything. We're just starting to see that really starting now. So I want to move on, and how is it relevant to this discussion? So this is the change from last year to this. So the overall score has gone from 43 to 45. What does that mean? What does this, 43 to 45? What it means is that you can see smartphone penetration, 4G, analytics are all strongly growing. So you can see that we can track the take-up on a global basis and on an individual country basis. We can measure your digital economy maturity using this technique. It's public data. Please go to the Huawei website. Global Connectivity Index. All this is downloadable and is a very good way to understand what's going on in the world. What does it mean then? If you see a 1-point change in your Global Connectivity Index, it's going to mean a couple of points changes in competitive innovation. This is the thing about the internet. People say, what is the internet for? Well, some people used to. Its effect is widespread, pervasive. It's an enabler of so many things that it's hard to say where it starts and stops in its effect. But if you add in the terminals, the networks, the 4G, the fixed, the gigabit fiber, if you add all these things together, you have a fundamental reshaping of just about everything we look at: education, manufacturing, government, and so on. So we can track these changes using this GCI. I want to pause on this slide because this slide is going to actually tell me most of the things I want to do to relate all this story to education. So if you take these basic 5 enablers down the bottom and you think about a school, if I connect a school to broadband, I have an immediate positive impact, or at least opportunity. What happens is you then get connected to a network where information becomes free or thereabouts. The cost of information reduces to effectively zero. So if you think about teachers, or the conversations we've had today about teachers very afraid of change, I don't think teachers are afraid of change. People are afraid of change they don't control. So you just have to put them in charge of the control and they'll be fine. But if you define a teacher as someone who knows something, and then you give all the students access to the world of information, all of a sudden they can know more things perhaps than you. So this challenges your authority. If you define yourself as a teacher, your authority at the front of the classroom is because you know more things, the internet is going to be an immediate challenge to you. And this is why a lot of the conversations, very good conversations I heard earlier today, this idea about the role of teachers. Teachers are becoming facilitators. They're going to be defined by people, not by what they know. They're not going to be the most knowledgeable person in the room. They're going to be the person who can get the best group learning experiences out of a group of people. They're a guide. They're a facilitator to learn skills. So the internet will do that. If you add in data centers, then you very quickly get a couple of key benefits. And one of the things that I understand anyway from my work in education is, surprisingly, when you add broadband to schools, the biggest benefit is, number 1, to teachers, number 2, to the administration of schools, and only third benefit, I would say, is to students. That is because the biggest benefit immediately is teachers' lesson plans, ideas, videos. It gives them a wealth of information, ideas, lesson plans. They can take best practice in their particular field and become much better teachers, a conduit to that kind of knowledge. The administration of schools take all of that marking, attendance, lesson planning, scheduling, put all of it in the cloud. Very simple. Lots of people will sell you software to do. So to move all the administration of schools into the cloud. And those two things right there, you've unburdened the staff from a lot of menial work. You've centralized it, you've cost reduced it, and then you've given the teachers the information they need. And this is a crucial pairing. If you think about the comment that was made by Intel earlier about the value created in Silicon Valley, all of the companies that he's thinking about, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Ubers, they've taken connectivity and cloud and made a business out of it. Connectivity plus cloud. So when I'm talking today about innovation and so on, I'm going to be basing it on a future that is connectivity plus cloud. Further up then, if you then add cloud-centric, then you can then have much better central systems, software as a service, you can have much better lesson planning and so on, the whole administration. So in other words, by adding broadband, I get access to resources. By adding the cloud, I get better administration and management. By adding, adding data centers, I get some management capabilities. I add cloud, then I get efficiencies, and further administrative benefits and better sharing of information, taking best practice from one place and sharing it everywhere. And then as I move up, I look at, say, big data, I would be looking at adding intelligence. So I can have systems that can do a lot of the marking. A student can upload his essay, have it assessed, and it can say, yeah, but your grammar's a bit weak, or maybe you should read, this book would be a good thing for you. A lot of ways in which machine learning can be applied directly to create personalized plans. And then IoT-centric, a little bit advanced, but you can see how smart schools tracking everything from attendance to badges to security to parking, everything can be wired up at some point. Those are the enablers. That's the waves of innovation that these fundamental technologies are supporting. And that's why I say connectivity plus cloud, that's where you need to start. So I'll just run through to the end then, and then hopefully we'll have some good questions. So this is a general point. You can put education in here as well. This digital economy, the way you get the benefit is the people who do it right, you take the digitization, you add it to the internet, and you get these new industries. Industry 4.0 in Germany, for example. I'm going to talk about China in a moment. It's taking those things together and in a coherent way, developing an entirely new economic basis. Verticals plus internet, that's the way to do it. I have 3 examples. There's not one way to do this. You develop a national plan that suits your purposes. It's wrong to say there's a standard way to do this. Indonesia, for example, are very much into the supply side. Indonesia is it's not a very well centrally planned economy. It's very fluid, it's very dynamic. So they're feeding the supply side of things with a lot of ICT investment. They're making sure that there's enough spectrum for the cellular. They're pushing SMEs for adoption. They're very much pushing the supply side. And the other nice thing about Indonesia is this Indonesia FTTH Association. This is all of the telcos plus the government coming together and realizing they have a common goal. Even though they are competing with each other, they are laying potentially services next to each other in the streets. They're still coming together to do joint planning. Some of the comments that have been made about open access, very good idea. It's a failure, in my opinion, if you have a street where multiple telcos are laying fiber optic. That's not good planning. Somehow we need to find a policy that gives the commercial companies a way forward whilst not wasting resources. So open access, national broadband networks are a way to do that. A couple more. China, very good example. They call it China Plus, a coherent strategy that takes connectivity plus investment into applications in industry. Look up China. China Plus is a very good example. Malaysia's my last example. A little bit all over the place. They're just trying to drive digital economies into the right areas. Malaysia is a very industrial-driven economy, a lot of manufacturing and so on. That's where they feel they can do. If you look at what the Global Connectivity Index, in terms of priorities, broadband is always number 1. So you can see the waves of these technology enablers. We haven't finished with broadband yet. That is still the focus for everyone. And you can have a look at this online. This is all published in the Global Connectivity Index. I've picked out what's called the starting, which is the economies with a relatively low maturity level in terms of digital economy. There's very clear here policy markers, things that we should be looking for, and policies that can deliver this kind of benefit. So I won't read them all out. But I believe that once you have a clear top-down vision of how the digital economy is going to serve you, all the tools and ideas are all there to be adopted. This is almost my last slide. So manage as you measure. So this digital economy, you've got the Global Connectivity Index. How else? There's a lot of things you can measure. You can measure VC activity, measure coverage, homes passed, average broadband. There's a lot of things you can do. I'll give you 2 recommendations. One, have a look at the Global Connectivity Index from Huawei. It's on our website. The other one I would recommend as a good read is the Network Resonance Index, which is ITU. Every year they publish it. They rank all the countries in the world. And if you go into what's behind the NRI, you can see where you're scoring high and low. It gives you an action plan if you're wondering, you want to benchmark yourself. So NRI and the Global Connectivity Index. My last slide. So what do we need to consider in making this digital economy that I'm talking about? I do believe it has to be top-down. On the other hand, a lot of what's going to happen is bottom-up. But the people who drive this from the top make progress faster. And people who drive not siloed, let's have an education ICT policy, let's have an industrial policy. You need an overarching policy that pulls them all together because there's so much commonality in terms of things like connectivity, data centers. There's no point putting computers into schools if there's no internet. You have to tie these processes up. Okay. So manpower and skills, digital economy. What I'm going to do, I'm going to bring it to a close, because I think based on some of the other sessions, we've had some really good questions. I'd like to turn it over to you guys in the audience. Hopefully, I've said a few things you don't agree with, that you may challenge me on. But I have to say, when it comes to education, I think I think you have to embrace the change, would be my short summary. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I like the idea that we need to create more local content. I like the idea that we're moving into a much more software-defined world, where soft skills. And the other thing I would say is think about, understand what jobs are going to look like in the future. So, for example, who would have thought 5 years ago that you could be a certified drone pilot? No one would have thought of that. But you can, right now, you can get a certificate to be an official drone pilot. So think about what the work is going to be like in 10 years' time. We don't even know the job titles yet. So what education system do we need to prepare people for a world actually we don't even have labels for? So I'll turn it over to questions. Hopefully you've been thinking about a few things. Yes, sir. Ah, yes.
Please let me apologize for sounding like a broken record. I came to this conference looking for something, and I seem not to be getting it up to this point, because I could have been in Lagos and said flyers about products that I could buy and budget for. You talked about inclusive development. I want to take you on that. Because you limited yourself to inclusive development to mean the consumer level involvement, communities, schools, and how we could all develop interest in the ICT ecosystem. Again, could your development be extended to the development of technology itself by unfettered involvement of the African mind in the development of the technology, rather than the African person coming to a market almost every year? This is about my third year. And I collect a shopping list and go home and say, please budget, so that you can go and acquire these things. Take, for instance, because we're almost about going the Coca-Cola way. For years and years, we've been drinking Coca-Cola in this continent. We don't know how Coca-Cola is made. Nobody ever wants to tell us how it's made. We get addicted to it, we drink it. How do you make Coca-Cola? Tell me. Nobody's willing to tell me. Is the ICT movement going the same way? I want to know. Thank you very much.
I'll leave that with them. Okay. So let me make a couple of points, and then maybe hopefully it will sound like a conclusion. One of the things that if you said, 10 years ago, let's put computers into schools, you'd probably be metal boxes with a separate screen and a big keyboard. And now you probably have, laptops and so on. In a sense, the hardware is becoming less and less of an issue. It's becoming cheaper and cheaper, faster and faster. And I know Huawei is primarily, we sell a lot of hardware. But I'd like to de-emphasize it in our future. Because what I think what's much more important are people who can work above the hardware level and work at a software level. So you've heard about software eating the world. And I agree, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think all of the smart things that are happening are all going to be done in software. And software has no boundaries. I used to work with a very good software engineer, excellent, who was blind. There are very few boundaries when it comes to software. So there's not a lot actually holding you back if you have the right ambition. Let me just give you throw a quick example. We all have, we've been to hospital, we have an X-ray. In the old days, you ended up with a big film, and you then carried that back to the doctor, who looked at that and went, yes, you're sick. What we can do, what Google is doing now, is it's using machine learning to scanning the film or just scanning the image, and it's providing a diagnosis. In fact, the diagnosis in some cases for, say, chest X-rays is more accurate than some of the best doctors. So now you can imagine a world where you go into an X-ray machine, it takes a digital image, it fires it off somewhere to some cloud, which could be local, and what comes back is a piece of paper, not a picture of your chest, but with a diagnosis. That's the future that I'm looking for, where the machine has really not changed for the last 20, 30 years, but the tremendous change in the value, all done by communication, cloud, smart analytics. And I can keep giving you stories like that. Uber, Facebook, all of these companies are connectivity cloud, and then they're trying to do something smart with the data. Google are trying to sell you adverts. Facebook are trying to stay relevant, sell you adverts. That's the world I'm looking at. And there's not actually that many barriers to that world. So I would say think software. So not manufacturing, think software, and whether it's, in the old world it used to be very much operating system based. The first Apple computer, we talk about the maker idea taking us back to building hardware. The first Apple computer was hardware. There was no software that ran on it. It was just a hardware machine. So back in those days, innovation was at hardware level. We don't do that anymore. We buy off-the-shelf hardware. We buy modules, and we drop in enough software to make it run, and then we get straight onto programming. So a lot of young people now, when they see the opportunities in the world, and they think, what shall I do? They become mobile phone application developers, because there's so few barriers to entry. So, and there's very few. If you want to do on Apple, you can download that software. It's $99 a year to be a developer. Android, you can download it for free. So I think software. How can you develop those software smarts and align the people developing that technology with a real problem, like medicine, like education? Align it with a real problem and create solutions that are perfect for you and therefore have a lot of value to you. That's what I would say. Yes, sir. Give that man a microphone. Or just shout.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Godswill. I'm the special assistant to the Minister, Tony Anwoka from Nigeria, that has been firing from double barrels. I wish to add a third barrel. Hawaii came to Nigeria 2008 with investments in education IT. I was privileged to be in that conversation. Hawaii set up a company 2008, and we asked fundamental questions, the type my minister is providing. How do you provide infrastructure, engineering infrastructure, for Nigerian youth to be involved in the creation of what you're doing in Nigeria? Because that is the way to grow the skill, transferable skill. As I'm talking to you, Hawaii infrastructure is dead. That was the end of conversation. I think the fundamental issue is what my minister has been talking since morning. And I had a conversation with Microsoft, just a manner of the shelf conversation. And I tell myself, for instance, look at that title. There's nothing like African ICT. Nothing like that. It doesn't exist. We don't have Taiwanese ICT. We don't have Chinese ICT. We don't have British ICT. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have is ICT. It's a global language, which can be incultured into the eye of the people. After all, knowledge grows from the ethos of the community. And I told my friend, we talk about STEM. If you recall, globally, STEM, and I would like to speak through my minister. STEM is science, technology, and mathematics. Science is knowledge, is global. God created the world and gave man knowledge. He didn't give British knowledge, African knowledge, Congolese knowledge, Asia Pacific knowledge. He gave global knowledge, and knowledge is science. Then we have technology, how to apply science. Then we have engineering, the infrastructure upon which technology grows. Then we have mathematics, the fundamental discipline of science and technology. Lately, just last few months, we globally, we added STEAM. Go Google it. STEAM means science, technology, engineering, arts and design, and mathematics. It is taught that without art and design, nothing will move. So I believe that we need to do a conversation, ladies and gentlemen. We need to sit down to ask ourselves, where do we belong in the global arena? We are Africans and we can create. We talk about transfer. I was invited by MacArthur Foundation to give a talk in New York last 2 years. And I said there are transferable skills. We share core values. So the business of this conversation, which brought me and my minister here, is to sit down to ask ourselves, how do we share core values? How does African government provide a enabling environment to grow the African skill in technology in our youth? Not the type my minister says, Coca-Cola brand. We've gone beyond that. And until we sit down to ask ourselves, we Africans, and I'm looking at all of us, there is nothing like technology transfer. It doesn't exist anywhere. How do they transfer technology to you? No. How did Asia Pacific grow? Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Philippines, South Korea. Where were they before? Where are they now? Brazil. Name them. China created a wall for 30 years and grew a Chinese technology. It's taking global economy. So I'm saying we need to sit down, like my minister has been saying. Sit down and talk. We can do transferable skill. We can ask ourselves deeper questions and deeper thought. That's why we're here. I'm a professor of math. I'm not a professor of Nigerian mathematics. No, it's global. Ladies and gentlemen, let's follow Minister Nwuka and create a path. And I'll tell you a story. If you go to a forest, don't ask for a path, create a path and grow. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once more.
Let me wrap up.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. I think I better wrap up and I better comment and I better respond to our honourable Nigerian guests and Minister Nwuka. Okay. I'm going to satisfy you, okay? I'm going to make your journey from Lagos worthwhile, okay? We're going to have lunch in a minute, yeah? And after lunch, please come back for just a couple of hours this afternoon. If I had presidential powers, I would insist, come back this afternoon. But I don't. I only have, I'm a lowly conference organizer. But I do have the power of persuasion, okay? Because after lunch, you're going to hear a couple of hours about the lessons learned from the digital literacy program here in Kenya. Now, the question raised by the minister about the transfer of knowledge and the transfer of technology. Okay, so Positivo invested initial $40 million into Rwanda, but it's an ongoing investment. But the Rwandese government, they insist they transfer the technology. They make conditions to Positivo. The digital literacy program here in Kenya, phase 2 will begin after January next year. It is conditional, there's a partnership. So more university partnerships with JP, Positivo partnerships with JQuat. It is insistent, it is the government's policy that if they want this digital literacy deal, they must manufacture, they must develop the means of production here in Kenya. And you, Minister, and all of you governments, you're the guys who write the legislation. You're the guys who decide the government policy. So, look, we're all adults here. These companies, Huawei, Microsoft, Intel, Positivo, JP, whoever, they're businesses, we know how they work. They're there to make profit, they're there to capture market share. But they can't do it And they can't have access to the world's biggest emerging market. Let's face it, Europe is stagnating, North America is stagnating. This is the market of the world now. So if the private sector and if industry wants to obtain and achieve its aims, it must do so under the legislation and the regulation and the demands of each individual African country. So, you can make those demands. Kenya has made those demands on the companies here. Develop the means of production, build the product here, build the content here, build the education cloud here, make the content indigenous to the country, and invest in the country to create jobs and employment. So, as I say, I can only persuade you. So please, I'm convinced that the partnerships and investment are taking place. Thank you for taking the time to come from Lagos. Thank you for taking the time to come from Kampala, from Lusaka, from Johannesburg, wherever you've come from across this continent, because these days will be productive. And this today is an introduction. The next couple of days of meeting will be highly productive. Please, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, enjoy lunch and have a productive couple of days. Thank you.